Welcome back to another episode of Psycosmos. Today, we have the esteemed author, Matthew Travagline, the author of the Gleeman Tales Duology. I finished the first book, and I reached out to Matt to see if he wanted to do a podcast with us, so that's why we're here. So, Matthew Travagline, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Tell us more about yourself, and just tell us more about like your book and what motivated you to be an author.
Well, I'm pretty standard fantasy geek. I get around the genre quite a bit. Movies, books, video games. I try and cover a pretty wide array there. One of my favorites, and for books specifically, is Robert Jordan, who wrote the Wheel of Time series.
Okay, nice.
Amazon's actually adapting right now, but that's one of my real inspirations. And then away from fantasy, I'm a pretty standard guy. I've had an odd assortment of jobs that I think I kind of play off of when I'm doing some writing. Like I've worked on a farm, I've worked in retail, which is a nightmare for anyone that's ever worked in retail.
Yeah, definitely.
Right now I work cybersecurity.
Nice,
so
nice.
I actually daylight as a writer instead of moonlighting. But
there you go.
I was a park ranger for a couple summers, so I've had an interesting gambit of jobs, which have all cemented the fact that what I want to do is writing.
Yeah. Well, Matt's also leaving out that he has a heart of gold, because we've actually known him since high school, and he's been one of the nicest guys that we ever talked to in that school. We've known Matt for quite a long time, so he's always been a very intelligent, very articulate, a driven young man, handsome as well. I mean, look at him. He's gorgeous. And he's joining us here today. So you wrote these two books, and you were able to publish both of them, at the same time, which is quite a feat, because it takes quite a long time to write a book, and I think an average book is somewhere between 200 to 300 pages. You wrote two books that are around 400 pages. Why don't you give us a little synopsis of the book, and tell us a little bit more about your struggles and your joys of writing over the years.
Sure. Yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head there, that writing a book is probably the most difficult thing that I've done, and I've gone on to, at this point, within the last 7 years, write 4. Since 2012, 2013, when the idea for Gleeman's really started percolating. They just both published in June of this year, so from the inception of the first idea of Gleeman's to when both Gleeman's and Harbinger hit the market was about 8 years or 7 years. So it's there's a lot that goes into the 200 or 300 pages that you don't really see when you're just interacting with the book as a consumer. So the process has given me a lot to be grateful for. But yeah, if I could give you a kind of a high level synopsis, I'll avoid any spoilers for either book. But
sure.
Good. Don't want to piss off the people in the YouTube comments with spoilers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you imagine that thousands of years into the future, that we have on our Earth, there's an apocalypse. Gleeman's Tales and the Harbinger of Change don't really deal with that, in the sense that like Mad Max or The Last of Us, where they deal with the apocalypse. This is the true meaning, I believe, of post-apocalypse. It is something that took place in the history of the world, and our characters have to deal with that, but this isn't like, we're not dealing with radiation, we're not dealing with nuclear fallout. This is, as for us, a modern day Earth, as far back as like antiquity in Egypt. That's thousands of years have separated the apocalypse from the present time during these books. So for them, it's just like something that took place a while ago that they really have no interaction with.
Right.
So in those thousands of years, people have recovered, humanity has recovered, they've reestablished cities, they've reestablished nations and states. And then as far as the technological capacity, the Earth has kind of reverted to what I consider a cross between medieval and industrial. So there are elements of industrial that retain. For the most part, it's very simple medieval society. It's very agrarian based with kind of hints and elements of a more modern society included. And occasionally you'll find bits of modern and postmodern included. So there are, some places where electricity is still, present, but it's kind of it's a rarity. And most people, like if you went up to an average person in this world and you were starting to talk to them about like airplanes and airplane travel, they would look at you like, you're talking a third language.
So it sounds like it's a bit of a mix between fantasy and science fiction in a way. Did you was that like the original intention behind it, or did you try to balance the two? Did you have like one that was meant to be the primary focus when you started writing?
I think that's definitely an astute observation that I knew kind of when I was drafting the idea out that it was going to saddle between fantasy and science fiction, just because of the setting that I wanted the story to take place in. You don't really typically see a lot of post-apocalyptic fantasy, just because by nature of being apocalyptic, that's implying some science fiction near futurism.
Right, and people are obsessed with it.
And I think that that's even impacted me as I started marketing for the book, because the audiences of that I feel don't overlap too much. So when I was trying to see if one of the two was more pertinent, if it leaned more in one way, I thought that fantasy would tend to be the higher over the two. But it seems like readers so far have clicked more with the kind of close to post-apocalyptic setting. Urban sci-fi elements tend to be what people grasp on, including Kirkus, who put it in the science fiction genre in their tags. The Earth hasn't completely forgotten about the kind of apocalyptic past. And I've written in that every decade or so, it's not exactly on the nose type thing, but the Earth revolves. The orbit has been tinkered with during the events of the apocalypse.
Right.
So every decade or so, it enters a year where it's so cold that the Earth reverts into what the characters describe as the mini ice age. Like the polar ice caps extend far into the main ocean. So you actually will see in the second book, which is when this ice age begins, you'll see the oceans freeze over, and people, merchants and tribes will navigate across the frozen ocean as if it was like, a standard tundra.
He's setting us up to get that second book.
All of that, which, we've just been talking about, is kind of just giving the backdrop, the setting of where our story takes place. And what I want to do is now bring Gnocchi Gleeman in. You didn't mishear that. So his name is spelled with one C, but he's pronounced however you, the reader, pronounce the pasta. People pronounce it any number of different ways.
Where did the name come from? Where did it originate? Where did you get the idea for the name?
I am Italian myself, but that wasn't. I think there are certain words and sounds that I really appreciate. I don't know if that's because I'm a writer or if I'm just weird, but like certain things I will disassociate their meaning with. Like every time I hear people say gnocchi now, I don't hear the pasta at all. I hear, like, why are they talking about this character? There is a thematic reason why he's named that, and it has to do with, and I guess this is a good segue, so I'll come back to that, Rich.
Gotcha.
So Gnocchi is a bard. That's his profession. He's a traveling storyteller. But what sets him apart is that he has this working knowledge of the pre-apocalypse. So the stories that he tells to people are encompassing of our current day, including some that's beyond that, because the apocalypse didn't happen in 2020, even though it seems like it's happening right now. So he makes his living telling stories. He travels between inns and taverns and any place that'll either pay him in coin or pay him in food to, regale some audiences for an evening. And these stories come from the fact that his family actually or curators of a library that survived the apocalypse. So he has this vast collection of books and tomes and stories from the pre-apocalypse, from thousands of years earlier, that he uses to either fabricate stories on his own or just tell them, verbatim. So one of the, and this is tying back to you asking about like why he's named that. He was named by his grandfather, who found a picture of one of their earliest descendants in the apocalypse, who was holding up a gnocchi, a little candy, or not candy, a little pasta.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And on the back it was written in the baby's name, but it was illegible, so you wouldn't be able to read what the baby was actually named. But it just said with the pasta, with gnocchi. And gnocchi's grandfather, who apparently had not been too well versed in the cooking section of the library, took that to mean that the baby was named gnocchi.
I see.
And since he, who was naming his grandson, decided that he would name it after one of their earliest ancestors in the apocalypse.
I think you were just hungry when you were writing this book. Is that what happened?
I must have. I am a fan of gnocchi.
I love gnocchi too.
I've never tried it.
It's really good.
I'm gonna now.
Yeah, gnocchi's really good. You should definitely try it.
They're like little pillows of
Yeah.
either potato or ricotta pasta.
There you go.
Really good.
Yeah, very good. Hey, I love the Italiano. There he is. This Goomba right here. Look at this guy.
Now that we're in the time period of when gnocchi lives, right?
Mm.
Before the events of the story take place, he's essentially decided to retire. He's not old. He's probably, I didn't put a number to him, but he's probably in his mid-40s.
Yeah.
He's wanted to retire, that way he can help curate the library and actually write down some of the stories that he's only heard and passed along through the oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's happening before the events of the story take place.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately before, Gnocchi's sister and niece are kidnapped by this shadowy group. And in order to free them, basically Gnocchi is tasked with assassinating the land's ruling monarch.
And from there, the story progresses into this, this adventurous tale of Gnocchi Gleeman and a whole cavalry of sidekicks and whimsical adventures with his horse Pierogi, which I love. I love that horse. That horse is great. It's this beautiful female horse that always has these little introspective moments where she's silently judging everybody as a horse. It's really nice. I like it.
For the longest time, it was just Gnocchi and Pierogi, which I had to, at that point, since I was going so on the nose with his name, I was like, what would be a good horse name to accompany that? Yeah, he's definitely riding a horse named Pierogi.
Absolutely.
I feel like when you travel around so much with just one other living thing, and if you can't physically communicate, you create these bonds where you're imagining their personality, you're imagining their sass in the case of Pierogi, and what she might say, what she might be thinking.
I love it.
So, yeah, I definitely wanted to. I wanted their bond to be one that was particularly memorable.
I like that you chose a horse too, because horses, it's like they're right up there with man's best friend with dogs, with how long we've domesticated them and how important and intelligent and loyal they can be. So it's really cool. It's more than just a way to get around. They're very intelligent, emotionally sensitive creatures.
Yeah, she's definitely more than just the vehicle to get him from point A to point B. She's there, in a non-speaking role for the most part. She's there as a companion.
Yeah, and the story is, as it progresses, it definitely gets more and more nail-biting as you kind of progress through at least the first book. I need to pick up the copy of the second book and finish the duology, but I can definitely say the first book progresses in a really great way. I'm curious. I want to know what your initial drive becoming an author was. What started you? I mean, if you want to touch more on the synopsis, that's fine too. But I definitely want to know. We've known you since high school, middle school. So it's more so looking at it from the lens of how long has this been an idea for you, and when did you finally decide at what age that you wanted to become an author, and what has kept you going for so long? Yeah,
I think as far as the synopsis, I think we hit the wall there without giving away The only thing else that I would mention is that shortly after the book begins, Gnocchi comes in contact with a character named Cleo, who's this older teen that basically escaped from an abusive family, who's been on her own. So between the two of them, they end up traveling with this like ramshackle menagerie, which is on its way to the capital. So they have some adventures there, and I wouldn't go into it too much,
Right.
for lack of spoiler.
Right. Yeah. We
But
didn't go
as
too
far
deep.
as the drive, I would say I've got three really solid pillars in my writing career. First is my mom, who bribed me to read one summer with an iPod video. I guess that's dating myself. They don't even make iPods anymore. And then two of my teachers, Mr. Casey, who I had in 9th grade as a freshman.
I remember
and
Mr.
then
Casey.
Miss Earl, who I had in 11th grade.
Yep, I remember Mr. Casey. Oh yeah. Shout out to Mr. Casey. If you're watching this, we're giving you a shout out.
Somehow.
Yeah, somehow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had written some stories in middle school, and I actually attempted a novel, but I only got maybe 40 or so thousand words in. Not that I was tracking it. I saw the file the other day in preparation. I was like, it was rough. That thing is never going to find the light of day outside of a graveyard.
There you go.
The moment when I realized that what I wanted to do was professional writing, novel writing, I can pinpoint to exactly, it was in Mr. Casey's 9th grade class. We had a writing assignment to write another chapter for Lois Lowry's The Giver, which kind of, I honestly, I don't even remember how that ends. I think it ends with some ambiguity.
Somebody gave somebody something. Who cares?
He's in the snow and he's with the kid.
Who cares? Somebody gave somebody to something like that. Whatever. I don't remember any of those books. They made us read all these awful books throughout school. Awful, terrible. United States education system, please get some interesting books because these books suck. Nobody, I didn't even read them. Anyway, go on.
So the assignment was to create a chapter after that to kind of expand on the ending, which interestingly, and this is something that I had a moment later when someone asked me my thoughts on fan fiction. I hadn't realized that this pinnacle moment in my writing career was a fan fiction moment. I always assumed that it, when I thought about it, it was like, oh, it's a school assignment. But if you take it away from the school piece, it was fan fiction.
Yeah.
Because I was using characters that already existed in a world that already existed.
Right.
Not that I was ever snobby about it, but if asked about it, I would be like, it's kind of one of those gray area things where, as an author, I'm not going to do that to other authors. As an author now who's written something that could potentially spawn fan fiction, I think it's kind of a flattery thing. That I've written something that someone likes enough to want to continue. But now I have to respect the importance that it has in my own writing career because this was the moment when I turned this assignment in and Mr. Casey read it in front of the class as kind of a, he didn't say this is the best of the submissions. He wouldn't be that callous.
Right.
But I think that he was impressed by it enough to kind of single it out at the end.
Yeah. And I think that what was important probably in that moment was your attachment to your own independence. You didn't see it, like you said, you didn't see it as a school assignment. You detached from that and you said, no, this is something I created myself. And you let that be like you said, a pinnacle, a pillar of what pushed you forward as an author. I think if, I always questioned why they make you take so many crappy courses in school, but I think it's so that you eventually take one course where you're doing something that you never thought that you would be doing up until that point as a teenager. And then once you take massive pride in it and you detach from that and you move forward in that way, that's one major aspect of what makes somebody successful. You could have seen it easily as a crappy school assignment, but you didn't, and you took ownership of it and priority of it and independence of it, and that hurdled you forward, I would say, from a motivation standpoint.
And then on top of that, he also, when I got in touch with him after that, he encouraged me to continue writing, and he offered, not that he was editing or offering his services in that way, but, he went through all the stories that I wrote that year and then throughout, my high school career, and he He read through everything that I'd written and really provided an insight that I can appreciate, even if none of those stories. I had to think about it because Gleeman's does include little stories that are separate from the main narrative, and I'm fairly certain that none of those made it in. None of the stories that I wrote during that year.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But I just can't emphasize enough how the way that was handled, that became the foundation of my writing career, and one of the pivotal moments in my life, truly.
Yeah.
So when did the specific idea for Gleeman's adventures and his story, when did that first start to come into your mind?
That one started, I was at Dutchess in Poughkeepsie at community college, which, away from writing, I would encourage anyone who's listening to utilize the community college system.
It's cheap. It's cheap.
And you can really get out what you put into it.
And kind of tangenting again, Dutchess offered a program through our local high schools where, depending on where you graduated, what percentage, you were able to go tuition free. So the first 2 years I was paying for gas and textbooks.
That's great.
Nice.
But soapbox aside, there was a moment I was in a British literature class, and we were talking about, we were reading through Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Which now you'll see some comparison between Gleeman's Tales and Canterbury Tales. My thought, the initial impetus thought was, what would Chaucer's story be like if it took place in an apocalypse?
There you go.
And from there, that was the launching point into all of the note taking that I did in preparation. And yeah, that was the moment there. If I could pinpoint one moment that spurred Gleeman's and Harbinger, it was that moment. And what works for me specifically, if you were asking, I have to separate the first draft from the internet. I have to handwrite it. That forces me to slow down. It forces me to think about what I'm writing. It removes some of the distraction.
Well, that's cool. It's definitely old school.
Then, as I type it up, that it includes another round of editing on top of that before I can even consider sending it to people, sending it out.
Now, how often did you get hand cramps writing out your first drafts?
All the time.
I guess that's the one downside.
Yeah.
I have a decent pen that if I'm writing for more than like 2 or so hours at a time, I'll start to get the fatigue. But usually I'll write in spurts like that. I won't be able to sit, at like 5 in the morning and write until 1. I won't be able to do like an 8-hour marathon. I have to write in like hour-sized chunks.
I gotcha. And I think that's definitely good advice because I know a lot of people who start writing books and then they overdo it and then they get fatigued from their own writing and their own stories. So that I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to ask you more about any advice that you had because you've been writing for over 10 years. You've published 2 books and you published 2 books or more than that?
Yeah, 2 books.
2 books, right? Okay.
And I've written 4.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
So you've written a lot, and it's not only just those books, because as you just said, I mean, we're in our mid-20s, and you started writing the Gleeman tales specifically when you were in college, or that was at least when the idea came. So, half of your writing career has been focused on these books and the future books that you're coming out with, and the other half was just, finding out your own narrative, your own style, gathering information. So, but at the end of the day, the point I'm trying to get across is it still takes a very long time to write a book, and I know so many people who want to, and a lot of the time they give up. So I really love the motivational advice that you're giving and the direction that you can push people at least to remain consistent with their writings. So I want to hear more from what you had to say about that.
Yeah, it's so much, like Gleeman's is about 120-some thousand words, which puts it, if I, off the top of my head, I think that's like around the size of some of the middle J.K. Rowling books,
yeah.
As far as, how that would peer to someone that, reads some mainstream stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if you broke that down over, say, 60 days, 2,000 words over 60 days is not a ton, but there's so much getting to that 120,000 words that you don't see in the word count. All the trial and error of the stories that worked, the stories that didn't work. That, you know, it's more like 500,000 words that went into that or more. And all of the trial and error, all of the editing that you don't see. You know, there's a reason why it took me 8 years to get Gleeman's Tales out, because I had a typed draft of it in 2014. And over those 6 years, and granted, there was some time where I was working on Harbinger, so it wasn't just one book that I was putting out. But I was still editing both books for the entirety of those 6 years. So there have been substantial revisions that you don't see. Specifically, there may have been romance subplots that got cut entirely. So it's stuff like that in the writing process that the audiences don't even know existed at some point, that coming and taking away a huge chunk out of that writing, that still has importance, but it just doesn't make it into that final cut.
So to get more specific with the process, are you the type of person, would you just sit down and just go into writing a chapter and then sort of edit that in real time as it happened, or are you more of like like an outline guy, get the bullet points of what you want to go on in the chapter and then sort of fill it in, flush it out?
I tend to and for any writers in the audience, they may know this as the pantsing versus the outlining debate, which is a great debate in writing communities. You will find people that are very, very much encamped in one side over another. I tend to hover in the middle, because I'll outline to an extent where I will go what I believe to be the chapters. When everything is that early, nothing is set in stone.
Right.
But I'll try and go chapter by chapter of what I think is going to be happening. But I'm not going to write up every little minutia.
Right.
I'm going to leave some of that to the discovery of when I'm writing the first draft.
Gotcha.
So I try and I find that works for me quite well. That I'll know the big stuff, but there'll be some little things and even some of these little things are not so insignificant. They're, what might come from them could be something that's very memorable. It could be something that audiences really enjoy, but it's just something that was organic in the moment. And I think that's why. I think when you have something like that, where the character says something that you didn't necessarily plan, or some event happens, some random encounter happens that in the moment seemed like it would fit quite nicely. I think those are moments where if an audience appreciates that, they can kind of see that it was organic and in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of people will champion for the pantsing method, because it's not going to seem as stagnated. It's going to seem more true to the author and true to the character. It's not going to seem like it was bulleted out in advance.
Gotcha. Yeah, I that definitely seems like it's an important priority as far as time management goes. And I think it really shows your analytical side that you are doing the math on the amount of words and how long it takes to edit and read and revise and everything else. I'm not sure if so many people who would be getting into that, especially from a younger age, would have that experience or knowledge. So that's definitely a good drop of wisdom on your end. I am really curious as to what made you decide to write 2 books at once rather than just do 1 book at a time.
I think it was more of I had, when I planned out what I wanted to be the greater story arc, I thought that was going to end up being in a trilogy. When I was initially planning it, I thought that it would be a trilogy, but after finishing Gleeman's Tales and seeing, and not that I wrote to the word count, because I disabled that as I'm typing it up. I wanted to be able to surprise at the end.
Oh, nice.
But once I figured out how long Gleeman's Tales was and how much more I had in the plan for the next book or books, I realized that I wouldn't be able to stretch it out to a trilogy. So in that sense, it was just, all right, well, let me finish it. And I kind of tweaked the ending of Gleeman's a little bit so that it was a little more natural. You might find that a little more infuriating because that really puts it on the cliff's edge.
Yeah, it definitely did end with a massive cliffhanger. No spoilers, but definitely a cliffhanger at the end for sure.
When I was planning it, I was planning the story of Gleeman's Tales. I wasn't thinking like, all right, in this book I need this to happen, in this book I need this to happen. So, if you would ask me like, would they ever end up combined? I would love that. But right now with self-publishing, that's it's not possible.
Gotcha.
Because of how Amazon and the POD, the print on demand, how the printer gets their profit. They really encourage like shorter, more succinct books.
Okay.
So the cut that they would take from each one, if I combine them into one book, which would be about 230,000 words or so.
Right.
It would I would have to sell it for like $30 to get.
Gotcha.
A couple of bucks off of it.
So it was more from an indie marketing strategy rather than your own like natural desire. If it were up to you, you would make it either like one large book or a trilogy of books. It sounds like.
Absolutely would have preferred to do one story.
Yeah.
And if I was being introspective about my writing style, I wouldn't think that like, I'm gonna do the cliffhanger in order to try and get quick sale off of someone that finished. I am happy with the ending that I had of Gleeman's, but in an ideal situation, if I could have just, money aside, I would have wanted it to be one story. It's almost like a Lord of the Rings thing. He had written all three as if it was one, and it was his publisher that broke it up into three. Not that I'm comparing myself to him, but if I could look at the greater story, I think it works better as one.
It's all about consistency and hard work, right? If you weren't consistent and you weren't putting in the effort, then you wouldn't have even gotten the first two books out, let alone be working on two more or have even more than that in the works in the future. Who knows where you're going to be in 20 years? You could be the next J.K. Rowling, the next Tolkien. You could be that next guy. And I think that the attitude that you have is really what drives an author forward more so than the content, because even if you're the worst writer in the entire world, and I would love to know if you agree or disagree, even if you're the worst writer in the entire world, if you consistently can put out books and you can put out works that people enjoy and they can give you that positive, constructive criticism, your art style will evolve over time. And it will be better, in my opinion, than the guy who, tries to write one-hit wonder novel and just kind of gives up and doesn't put in the hard work, even if they're the greatest writer in the world. I think that skill and talent as a writer and intelligence and research capability definitely comes into play. But I think one of the most important aspects in anything, whether it's writing or whatever you want to do, is work ethic. Because if you don't put in that effort and you don't remain consistent while also staying motivated, then what do you really accomplish? You don't accomplish much. But what you've done, Matt, is, and I might be biased because I know you personally, but what you've done is you've honed a craft in a very short amount of time for somebody who is relatively young. We're not even 30 yet. And you've been able to publish 2 books, you're working on 2 more, and who knows how many you'll have by the time you're 30. So for me, that is truly an inspiration. I don't think a lot of people can pull off not only having a full-time job, but also on the side fulfilling their deepest calling, if that makes sense. I want to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say I agree. I think you can get lucky. I think it's absolutely possible to get lucky and have a book that sells millions of copies and just sets you up for life. But and I would probably be happy if I was that lucky to have a one-hit wonder. This is one of those things where it's like, are you happy to have a one hit that sets you up for life, or is there something more fulfilling? When you start telling people that you want to be an author, they're always like, oh, you're going to be broke.
Yep.
Find something to pay the bills, which, yeah, I did. I think that if I had the choice to have a one-hit wonder and then never write anything substantial again, or to be, a kind of middle of the road with consistent publishing, consistent fan base that enjoys what I write, and something that will keep me busy well beyond, the kind of retirement cutoff of 65. I would absolutely pick that.
Yeah, and that calls to your character. That shows the type of person that you are. But that's not only just in real life. That also bleeds into your books, and that's one of the things I loved while reading Gleeman's Tales is that I could, I know you a little bit, so I'm hoping that this gives a little bit of introspection for anybody watching at home. But I could definitely feel that the amount of work that you put in the book was. It was massive. I mean, especially for somebody who did it in a short period of time at a young age. And that is kind of the takeaway here, which is so many people want to become something, even if it's as difficult as becoming an author or something even more than that. President of the United States, whatever. And no matter how hard it is, though, it's accomplishable if you have the right mindset and you have the right attitude about it. And that's what I appreciated about your books is that your character creation is wonderful, and the conversations that your characters have are very positive overall. Even when, dire things might be happening in the story, the conversations that the characters have are very positive, and because of that you feel good while reading the book. Whereas there are some other books which are very insightful, but they're incredibly negative, like J.R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones series, Song of Fire and Ice, or Ice and Fire. What's the title? A Song of Ice and Fire?
I think it's Ice and Fire. Because I always want to do Fire and Ice. But
I always say Fire and Ice, but it's a Song of Ice and Fire. So even in J.R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, his entire series, the characters are wonderful, the combat's wonderful, yada yada yada, but it's extremely gloomy, and that's kind of the point. It's extremely negative. Even while watching the show, it's reflected. You're sitting there on the edge of your seat. But then you also have to think of the negative repercussions when the show ended and people didn't get the majority of the fans didn't get the ending that they wanted. Whereas with Gleeman, well, it's the truth. With Gleeman's Tales, it's a little bit of a different story because for me, it's like no matter what happens in the book, it was such a positive, happy experience reading the book, at least from my perspective, that the takeaway of it gets to show a little bit of the author's character, but it also shows the writing style, which again is positive. I'm harping on the positive, but I think that's really important. That's something that more people need to have these days, is positivity in their writing. So I'll throw it back to you. I wanted to know more about your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I'd be interested in seeing what you thought after reading Harbinger.
Okay.
Oh boy.
It gets probably a little more gloomy, more Game of Thronesy.
It's not, it's not going to be Game of Thronesy, but there's definitely a lot more internal struggle going on.
Oh, Matt, don't tell me that all these characters that I love are going to die now. Oh my God.
No,
I'm joking. I'm joking with you. I'm joking with you. I'm joking with you. Well, let me just ask you this. Does a dragon come in and destroy everything that the entire series was trying to build up upon? Does that? Okay, well then, all right. It's already better than Game of Thrones. We don't have anything to worry about.
And granted, I'm super biased, but I think that the ending that I set up, I think it's fulfilling for all characters.
Good. That's all that really matters at the end of the day, as long as it's fulfilling and people are happy. J.R.R. Martin. I really wanted to know more about writing is, I would say, and I'm not really a writer. I've definitely written a lot of stuff, but I would say writing for some people can be pretty stressful. So jumping on more of the positive bandwagon, what are some overall really positive, great experiences that you had while writing the book or the books in general?
So I mentioned that I handwrite my first drafts. So the most positive, the best moment that I had over the entire 8-year experience was the moment of finishing the first draft of Gleeman's Tales. Such a heavy burden for the longest time. And I say that in the way that, a parent might say that their child is a heavy burden.
Yes.
To have something on paper from start to finish, and granted for that kind of story it wasn't the complete ending, but it was an ending, and it was such a euphoric moment, kind of carrying this, carrying the stress of writing, just even outside of the stress of the story, because if something happened, not that I always kind of fantasize like what happens if I'm in the middle of a story and then I die, and you know, because like Robert Jordan passed away as he was writing the last book in his mega 14-book series.
Yeah.
Which was devastating because he passed, but also for the unfinished aspect of his, you know, his magnum opus.
Oh, right.
Never gonna know how
he
you would have envisioned
like,
it.
If I, you know, what happens if something happens to the book as I'm writing it? If I die, you know, what's gonna happen? And that's like a uniquely Matt kind of stress.
Sure.
But that's a stress that I deal with.
Internalized stress.
Finishing it and getting it all on paper, where even if something happened to me, like it would still exist beyond my own finite life.
Yeah.
And then, you know, as I progressed along, and once it got typed up and it was saved in multiple places, then even the fire, you know, once it was in the Google on the cloud, you know, a fire that killed me wouldn't kill the story.
Right.
And it's like super dramatic for no reason, but you know, that's kind of the really gallowsy fantasies that I kind of grapple with as I'm writing it.
Okay.
So as far as you're concerned as an author and your style and everything, I noticed that it seems like you're really good at describing settings and that sort of thing, which I really love. Just like the opening few sentences, just the acrid smell of the sawdust hitting is not I love that stuff. But what would you say is you think your strongest point, or maybe not just your strongest, but the thing that comes to you easiest as far as, you know, setting and dialogue and those sort of things is concerned? And where did you think you struggled the most and made the most improvement?
Great praise from the fact that you think my description is among my strong suits, because if I had to pick out my weak link, I would say that description is probably where I suffer the most. Like if you look at all the stickies that I had in my first drafts, it's always like, you know, I'm writing, I've gone like 3 pages in a row of pure dialogue because it's just flowing, and I'll get to the end of it and I'll be like, wow, they're just in a white room right now. There's nothing going on besides them talking. So I'll write a couple stickies and it'll be like, put life into this scene, you know, like give me some action, give me some description going on. So, you know, I feel like what comes easiest to me is the dialogue. And off of that, I think that's due to the fact that I'm so entrenched in the characters. So, you know, when the characters go off on their own outside of the planned, you know, this is what we should do, this is what you should say, and they, you know, come up with their own quirky little things and their little quips, it's more natural because I feel like I have such a strong grasp on the characters.
And I would agree that, I mean, I like all the writing styles of yours. And, you know, just to preface, I mean, I do have to say this just to make it well known to the audience. I do not read many fiction books. I think maybe the last fiction books I read were from college, when I was reading things like Milton's Paradise Lost, and that's not even real. I mean, that's kind of like a fan fiction of the Bible, really. I mean, that, and Beowulf, I think, might have been the actual last fiction. Maybe Dante's Inferno, if you even consider that fiction or whatever, what have you. That's like the closest thing I've read to the last thing that was a fiction book. I read a lot of more nonfiction than anything else, but I was actually really captivated by this book because of, you know, not only the writing style. I mean, of course I'm biased, I know the author, but not only the writing style, but also the setting and the backdrop and the character and the main character and all the side characters too. It really was an adventure going through that book. So I was very pleased with it, and I'm not really a fiction reader. So the fact that Matt could grasp my attention for a whole 400 some odd pages is impressive, to say the least, I would say.
That's very high praise.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I found that more people are not. I mean, I don't think that's saying anything. Any hot takes, but there's, you know, the number of people that read consistently, right, and are like would classify themselves as readers. I think as the years go on, that's getting
it's a very, very
Definitely.
Small minority.
People do not read books.
They do not read
very much at all. Unfortunately,
read your books and eat your vegetables.
Yes,
and support your library.
And support your goddamn local libraries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote a good chunk of my most recent book in the library because, so kind of tangent here, and this is maybe an advice as well. When you're writing, I would say try and limit your social media distractions as much as possible.
Great
When I
advice.
was first writing Gleeman Tales, I deactivated my Facebook.
How about just get rid of social media in general? We don't need it.
So I unfortunately I can't subscribe to that because I need to live and die
Right,
off of
right.
having a social presence.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, us too.
Got to market.
Us too. Yeah.
Yeah, marketing are. If you can limit that, and going into the library, it was a quiet place. With the exception of my cell phone, it was just me and my story and I.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a grammar person.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Who
Yeah.
cares about syntax?
Yeah, it was
It's a
just.
pain in
It
the
was
ass.
just. Yeah. It's,
You just have to find what works for you.
Yeah.
For me, that was limiting the social media. It was going to some place like where I can't pull up controller and start playing. I'm in a specific mood, a specific mindset to write, and that I found is what helps me. It's the most cohesive to writing for me.
Okay, great. So we are wrapping up here. We're getting short on time, so I really wanted to ask you. Did you have any more questions for him?
The only thing I was going to say was, it's just I guess a point of appreciation is that it seems like and it just makes even more sense with what you were describing writing in the library. It seems like a big central theme is the appreciation of the written word in like every capacity, between him being the curator, telling stories, wanting to write down the stories and spread the knowledge. That came across really strong. And as you just said, writing in the library, it just clicks even more, and it makes perfect sense. So I guess what would be something along that line that you would want to emphasize for people to appreciate as far as the written word and writing and reading goes?
Yeah, I think I'm glad that comes across. I think that storytelling as an art, storytelling as, and this is something that is touched upon in Harbinger, as humanity's first real occupation. Like there's a little vignette story in Harbinger, which talks about kind of the proto-human, the first proto-human that is at the bottom rung of being a decent hunter, but he still manages to feed himself and his family by telling these grand stories about how the meat that he had captured, that he had killed, was stolen from him by magic, and all these other things. And that was just kind of like a fun little thing to write in. But I appreciate storytelling as an art, and I think in all of the books that I've planned and the books that I've written so far, there's definitely an aspect of storytelling included within.
I really like your little excerpts, the little stories that you wrote. I feel like those definitely gave a perspective of trying to show like subtle nuances and kind of like themes and messages that you were trying to convey that were that were kind of like meta inserted into the story, and that's something I kind of appreciated. It was kind of like you were trying to give more in certain stories. It was like you were trying to give more of like you were trying to tell a duology of what was going on in the story, but also what was going on in the Gnocchi and all his characters. There were some certain like parallels that you could draw between the stories that he was telling at certain times. So I really did appreciate that. But Matt, I wanted to ask you what you're working on next, what you got in the pipeline, what we can expect in the future, or where can your viewers find you as well? Where are you located, and how can people follow you, and where can people purchase your books?
So right now I'm in just the kind of promotion period for Gleeman's and Harbinger. And I'll be in that for a long time. I don't think I'll ever truly give up on that. As far as the future works, I've written my third book, which is a standalone robot science fiction novel called The Humanity Edict. I'm in the middle of doing some heavy revisions on that, but it's my hope to actually publish that traditionally.
Okay.
So that one is still a number of years down the line.
Mm-hmm.
The whole process of getting an agent, and then once you have an agent, which is a 1 in a million, then having the agent submit to publishers, it's a lot of waiting. It's a lot of a lot of rejection. So
Built character.
yeah, it builds a lot of character.
Yeah.
That novel is in a perfect position to become my traditionally published debut novel because it's standalone. So there's nothing, there's no sequels that are predicated on it succeeding. It's a complete story in and of itself, and it also more succinctly sits in the science fiction genre, whereas like Gleeman's definitely teeters in sci-fi and fantasy. And even though I find that an endearing aspect of it, much to its unfortunate that because it straddles the two genres, that it hasn't gotten as big a footing in either one. And I think that if I could go back and redo it, I would try and find something that is more in line with either or. But the Humanity Edict is definitely sci-fi. There's no swords. There's no swords in it. There's no magic in it. It's well, then again, sci-fi technology is magic, but that's another thing.
Nice.
And then the fourth book that I'm in the process of typing up right now, so that's still in its second draft, is a spacey sci-fi kind of tale about the last human colony ship.
Okay.
And that one is still many years out.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And then as far as where you can find me, I'm on most of the big social medias. I have an author Facebook page, Instagram, I got a website that
We're gonna drop all his links down below, so you guys can just click on all those, and you can go follow him and purchase his books as well off of Amazon or wherever else you want to send them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually working with 2 indie bookstores that are carrying Gleeman's Tales and Harbinger Change. So they have the books and they'll ship them to you. They have signed and doodled copies. So if you feel like supporting not only an indie author but also an indie business, especially during these times, I'm sure you'll have those links as well.
Yep.
Awesome.
Absolutely. We'll have the links down in the description below, so if anybody wants to go check Matt out, go for it. I highly recommend it. And then, is there anything else that you wanted to say?
Yeah, just to wrap up, if you do go on to read, even if you don't enjoy it, I would say to help out would be to just leave a rating and a review on either Amazon or Goodreads. Right now I'm living and dying by the mighty algorithms.
Yes. Yes.
Aren't we all?
Aren't we all? The mighty algorithm.
Even, I feel like sometimes people think that if they're not going to, 5-star love it or 1-star hate it, then, they're not going to bother with the review. But for a prospective reader to see a variance of opinions, even if they can clearly see that, some of the 5 stars are just like fake accounts, some of the 1 stars are people that absolutely hated it for, an illogical reason, just to see that variance they'd be more inclined to pick it up and try it.
All right, great.
That's a very mature way of looking at it.
Yep. Absolutely. Constructive criticism and feedback. That's always a positive. That's always good.
It's always appreciated.
Absolutely.
I would rather have a 2-star review that goes into in great detail as to what the weaknesses are, because then I can look at it once I stop crying, look at it and see what are their complaints, what are they thinking that my weaknesses are, and if that's something that I want to change, if that's something that I haven't realized, that could prove invaluable in the future.
Go check out Matt Travagline and his books, Gleeman's Tales. They're out there on Amazon. You can go purchase them. Go follow him as well. Make sure if you like this video, you like and subscribe. Comment down below what you think. And thanks again. Matt, it was a pleasure having you.
It was good to see you again.
It was great seeing you.
Matt and Rich, I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. And I'm a huge fan of Psycosmos, so
thank you.
The fact that you reached out and were like, "Hey, do you want to come on?" I was beyond thrilled.
The pleasure's all ours, Matt. The pleasure's all ours. Please. Yeah, it was absolutely great having you. Hopefully in the future we'll have you again, maybe after
with Harbinger and whatever the future holds.
The Humanity Edict.
That's a great title.
Yeah,
honestly, that's a really cool sounding title.
Sounds awesome. I'm really excited.
Well, thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you.